Welcome. For generations, humanity has gathered around fires just like this one, seeking warmth and safety from the darkness that presses in. And in that circle of light, we have always done one thing. We have told stories, stories of heroes, stories of gods, and stories of the things that lurk just beyond the firelight. In the shadows our eyes cannot pierce. On this channel we often walk the moonlit lanes of Sleepy Hollow, tracing the hoofprints of one particular phantom. But the Headless Horseman is not an isolated phenomenon. He is a single terrifying branch on a vast and ancient tree, a tree whose roots are fed by the oldest and most potent human emotion. Tonight, we embark on a different kind of investigation. We are looking for the ghost behind all ghosts, the monster that created all monsters. Our subject is fear itself. We will ask the question, what if fear is not just a reaction, but a creative force? What if it is an engine that has for millennia forged our cultures, shaped our laws, and written our most enduring stories? Our journey will take us back to the dawn of civilization, to ancient Mesopotamia, where the fear of death drove King Gilgamesh on the world's first epic quest. We will stand in the firelit halls of the Danes, feeling their terror of Grendel, the monster who embodied the chaotic wilderness. We will sail on Viking longships, where the fear of the endless ocean spawned krakens and sea serpents. We will witness the mass hysteria of the witch trials, where the fear of the devil in their midst turned neighbors into monsters. From the vampires of Eastern Europe that represented a fear of plague and foreign invasion, to the urban legends of today that reveal our anxieties about technology and modern life, the pattern is the same. Our nightmares are a map of our societies. To understand a culture, you must first understand what it fears. So draw closer to the fire. The greatest story ever told is the story of what scares us. It is perhaps the first human story. You are huddled with your kin, the warmth of the fire on your faces, the immense, star-filled darkness at your backs. The world beyond your small circle of light is unknown, and the unknown is the womb of all monsters. A sound breaks the stillness, a snap of a twig, a rustle in the leaves. Is it a predator, a rival tribe, or something else? In that moment of shared vulnerability, a narrative is born, a story to explain the sound, to warn the children, to bind the tribe together in a common understanding of the dangers that surround them. This is the genesis of the fear engine. Fear in its purest form is a survival mechanism. It is a biological response to a perceived threat. But for humanity, it has always been something more. It is the catalyst for imagination, the raw material for narrative, the blueprint for culture itself. Our fears of death, of pain, of the unknown, of chaos, of the other, have been the single most creative and destructive force in our history. To understand human civilization is to understand the evolution of what we dread and the stories we have crafted to confront, explain, and sometimes to weaponize that dread. This is a journey into the architecture of our nightmares, a historical look at how fear built the world we know. Our journey begins, as all human stories do, at the dawn of civilization, in the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia. Here, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, humanity first built cities, developed writing, and codified laws. And it is here that we find the first great masterpiece of world literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. At its heart, This is not a story about gods and monsters, though it has plenty of both. It is a story about the first and most fundamental human fear, the terror of annihilation, the fear of death. Gilgamesh is a king, 2/3 god and 1/3 man, powerful and arrogant. He lives without thought of his own mortality until he befriends Enkidu, a wild man created by the gods to be his equal. Together they are invincible, slaying monsters and defying deities. But when Enkidu is struck down by the gods as punishment, Gilgamesh is forced to watch his beloved friend, his other self, decay and die. For the first time, the mighty king is confronted with the inescapable reality of his own human thirst. The text is unflinching in its description of his psychological collapse. Gilgamesh weeps for 7 days and 7 nights, refusing to give up the body until a worm crawls from Enkidu's nostril. In that moment, the epic's true quest begins. Shall I not die too? Am I not like Enkidu? He cries. Consumed by a visceral terror of his own demise, he abandons his throne, his city and his life, and sets off on a desperate journey to the ends of the earth, to find the secret of eternal life. This narrative, written over 4,000 years ago, is the first cultural artifact of existential dread. The fear of death is no longer just an instinct. It is a story. It is a quest. The monsters Gilgamesh fights on his journey, giant scorpions, stone men, are mere external obstacles. The true monster is the one inside him, the gnawing certainty of his own end. The story of Gilgamesh is humanity's first attempt to wrestle this ultimate fear into a narrative form, to give it shape and meaning, and its conclusion is just as profound. He fails. He does not find eternal life. Instead, he is told to go home, to cherish the world he has, to find meaning not in permanence, but in the fleeting beauty of mortal existence. The narrative doesn't defeat the fear, but it transmutes it into a philosophy for living. The fear engine has produced its first great work of wisdom. As civilizations grew, another primal fear demanded a narrative. The fear of the unknown, of the chaos that existed outside the fragile walls of human settlement. In the cold, damp climes of northern Europe, this fear found its ultimate expression in another epic, Beowulf. The story is set in the Danish mead hall of Heorot, a symbol of everything good and orderly in the world. It is a place of light, warmth, community and song, a tiny island of human creation in a vast sea of menacing wilderness, and from that wilderness comes Grendel. He is not just a monster. He is the personification of the fears that lie outside the hall. He is a walker in darkness, a fiend out of hell, a descendant of Cain, the first murderer. He is the embodiment of envy, rage, and chaos. He cannot stand the sound of the laughter and song from Heorot, because it represents an order from which he is eternally excluded. When he attacks, he is not merely killing warriors. He is attempting to extinguish the light of human society. The narrative of Beowulf is a powerful tool for cultural definition. It draws a stark line between us and them. Us is the community within the hall, bound by loyalty and shared values. Them is the monstrous, the chaotic, the unknown, that lurks in the fens and wastelands. By creating a hero like Beowulf, a man of immense strength, who comes from across the sea to defend order, the story provides a fantasy of control. It suggests that this terrifying chaos can be confronted and defeated by courage and strength. The fear of the unknown wild is given a face, a name, and a weakness. The fear engine here isn't just creating a scary story. It's reinforcing the very concept of civilization by creating a narrative about its defense. This fear of the external monster, the chaotic other, would dominate ancient narratives. The Greeks feared the untamable passions of nature and the gods, personifying them in creatures like the Hydra and the Minotaur. Sailors, pushing into the vast unknown oceans, populated their maps with krakens and sea serpents, narrative expressions of their terror of the deep. These stories served a dual purpose. They were cautionary tales, warning of real dangers, but they were also psychological tools. By giving a form to the formless dread of the storm or the abyss, they made it something that could, at least in story, be understood and perhaps even survived. But as centuries passed, and the known world expanded, the focus of fear began to shift. The most terrifying monsters were no longer just in the wilderness outside the walls. A new and more insidious narrative was taking hold. The monster was now within the walls. It was inside your neighbor. It was inside. We move now into the medieval world, a society dominated by a single monolithic narrative, Christianity. And with it came a new and profound architecture of fear, centered on the immortal soul. The greatest terror was no longer a physical death at the hands of a monster, but an eternal death in the fires of hell. Dante's Inferno, with its meticulously structured circles of punishment, wasn't just poetry. It was a widely accepted travelogue of the afterlife. Demons, devils, and damnation became the central figures in a cultural narrative designed to enforce moral and social control. Fear of divine retribution was a powerful tool for shaping behavior, uniting Christendom against perceived internal and external threats. This fear of internal corruption reached its zenith with the great witch hunts that swept across Europe and later America. The witch was the ultimate internal monster. She could be anyone: your neighbor, the local midwife, a lonely old woman. The narrative of witchcraft was one of a vast satanic conspiracy, a secret internal army working to overthrow God and society. This story was fueled by a confluence of fears: fear of female power and independence, fear of pre-Christian folk traditions, fear of social and economic change, and the ever-present fear of the devil's influence. The Salem witch trials of 1692 are a perfect case study of the fear engine gone haywire. A small, isolated Puritan community, beset by political instability, economic hardship, and recent bloody conflicts with Native Americans, became a crucible of anxiety. Their profound fear of God's displeasure and satanic infiltration needed an outlet, a narrative to make sense of their suffering. That narrative was provided by the afflicted girls, and the figure of the witch became the scapegoat for all of the community's ills. The fear was so powerful that it overrode reason, justice, and humanity. Spectral evidence, the idea that a witch's spirit could attack you in a dream, was accepted as fact. The story became more real than reality itself, with deadly consequences. Here, the fear engine was not creating a cautionary tale, but a self-fulfilling prophecy, a cultural narrative so potent it demanded a blood sacrifice. It demonstrates with terrifying clarity how a story born of fear can become a license for unspeakable cruelty. The aftermath of the great witch hunts left a scar on the Western psyche. The Age of Reason and the Enlightenment followed, promising a new world order, governed by logic, observation, and scientific inquiry. It seemed, for a moment, that the fear engine might finally run out of fuel. Superstition was to be banished by empirical evidence. The monsters of the dark would be dispelled by the bright light of knowledge. But fear is a deeply adaptable force. It did not disappear. It simply mutated. The fear of the supernatural waned, only to be replaced by a new and chilling terror, the fear of the unnatural. The most terrifying monsters would no longer come from hell, but from the laboratory. This transition is perfectly embodied in Mary Shelley's 1818 masterpiece, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. The novel is a direct product of its time, born from an era of galvanic experiments that made dead frogs' legs twitch, and a growing unease about the speed and ambition of scientific discovery. The story's central fear is not of a demon or a ghost, but of human hubris, the terror of man playing God. Victor Frankenstein is not a wicked sorcerer, but a brilliant, arrogant student who, driven by a desire to conquer death, oversteps the boundaries of nature. His creation is the ultimate scientific monster. It is assembled from the charnel house and the dissecting room, stitched together from the dead and animated by a spark of stolen lightning. Yet Shelley's genius is that the creature is not born evil. He is intelligent, articulate, and yearns for companionship and acceptance. He becomes a monster only after he is rejected with horror by his own creator, and subsequently by all of humanity. The true horror of Frankenstein is twofold. First, it is the terror of the unintended consequences of our own knowledge. We create things we cannot control, unleashing forces that may destroy us. It is a fear that would only grow echoing through the development of the atomic bomb and modern anxieties about artificial intelligence. Second, and perhaps more profoundly, it is a social fear. The story turns the mirror back on us, suggesting that the true monstrosity lies not in the creature's appearance, but in our own lack of compassion, and our revulsion towards anything that is different. The fear engine, once powered by superstition, now retooled itself, finding fuel in the lecture hall and the laboratory. The narrative it produced was a powerful cautionary tale about the limits of human ambition and the moral responsibilities that come with knowledge. As the 19th century progressed, the world grew smaller. Steamships and railways connected distant lands, and the great cities of Europe, like London, became sprawling, multicultural hubs. With this unprecedented mixing came a new set of anxieties. The fear engine began to process the dread of contagion, the terror of foreignness, and the unease of a seemingly rational modern world being invaded by an ancient, corrupting evil. This confluence of fears would give birth to the most enduring monster of the modern age, the vampire, as immortalized in Bram Stoker's Dracula, published in 1897. At the peak of the British Empire, Dracula is a compendium of late Victorian fears. Count Dracula is not just a monster. He is a foreign invader from the mysterious, superstitious East, who comes to the heart of modern industrial London to breed and corrupt. He represents a fear of reverse colonization, the terrifying idea that the primitive cultures the empire sought to control could in turn invade and conquer the imperial core. His vampirism is a thinly veiled metaphor for contagious disease. In an era before antibiotics, when scourges like syphilis and tuberculosis were rampant and poorly understood, the idea of a disease passed through the blood, one that transformed and corrupted its victim, was a very real and present terror. Dracula's threat is also deeply social and sexual. He preys primarily on women, turning the chaste and pure Lucy Westenra into a wanton, voluptuous predator of children. His bite is a violation, a monstrous parody of intimacy that bypasses Victorian society's rigid sexual mores. The narrative becomes a story of a small band of modern men, a doctor, a lawyer, a psychiatrist, using all the tools of modernity, blood transfusions, telegrams, phonograph recordings, to combat an ancient superstitious evil. The fear is that their modern rational world is not enough to protect them. The narrative pits science and progress against ancient bloodlust and superstition, and the outcome is far from certain. The vampire story, as crafted by Stoker, became the perfect cultural narrative for an era grappling with fears of disease, immigration, and the stability of its own civilized identity. Yet, even as these tales explored monsters created by science and invaders from foreign lands, the fear engine was undergoing its final, most profound transformation. The focus was turning inward. The ultimate fear, the most terrifying story, was not about the monster outside the gates, or the monster in the next house, or even the monster in the laboratory. It was about the monster inside oneself. This ultimate internalization of horror is captured perfectly in Robert Louis Stevenson's 1886 novella, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This story emerged from the heart of a deeply repressed Victorian society, where maintaining an image of public respectability was paramount, often at the cost of suppressing one's natural desires and darker impulses. Dr. Henry Jekyll is a respected, upright physician who is tormented by this duality. He feels he has two selves, a disciplined, socially acceptable man of science, and a primal, hedonistic creature straining against its cage. His great experiment is not to create life from death, but to separate these two halves of his own soul. He creates a potion that allows him to transform into Edward Hyde, a being of pure, unadulterated evil, free from all conscience and social restraint. At first, this provides a thrilling release. Jekyll can indulge his darkest fantasies through Hyde and return to his respectable life, with no apparent consequence. The fear narrative here is not about being attacked by a monster. It is about the terrifying pleasure of becoming the monster. The story charts the gradual loss of control. The transformations become involuntary. The evil of Hyde begins to dominate the good of Jekyll. The central horror is the realization that Hyde was not something created from the outside. He was a part of Jekyll all along, merely unleashed. The potion did not create the beast. It only opened the door to its cage. This tapped directly into the burgeoning psychological theories of the era, and the universal human fear of losing control, of our own inner savagery breaking through the thin veneer of civilization. The narrative of Jekyll and Hyde declared that the walls of the city and the locks on our doors are useless, because the most dangerous monster imaginable is already inside, a permanent resident of the human heart. From Gilgamesh's fear of the void, to Beowulf's fear of the wild, to Salem's fear of the neighbor, to Frankenstein's fear of his creation, Dracula's fear of the invading other, and finally, Jekyll's fear of himself, we see a clear historical trajectory. The locus of fear, and thus the source of our most powerful stories, has consistently moved from the external world ever inward, finally coming to rest within the complexities and contradictions of the individual human mind. This inward turn would set the stage for the psychological horrors of the 20th century, where the fear engine would be fueled by new, unprecedented anxieties, global war, nuclear annihilation, and the unsettling alienation of modern life. The dawn of the 20th century, with its promises of unprecedented technological advancement and social progress, was shattered by the cataclysm of the First World War. The fear engine, which had spent centuries processing dread of the natural, the supernatural, and the psychological, was now confronted with a new industrial-scale horror. The terror was no longer of a singular monster emerging from the mist, but of a monstrous impersonal system of trench warfare, poison gas, and mechanized slaughter. The individual felt terrifyingly small, a cog in a vast, incomprehensible machine of death. This profound sense of alienation and powerlessness required a new kind of narrative. This new fear found its voice in the works of authors like H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft's cosmic horror was a direct response to a world where old certainties had been obliterated. His central thesis was that humanity's greatest fear is not of evil, but of insignificance. The monsters in his stories are not personifications of sin or chaos. They are beings like Cthulhu and Azathoth, ancient godlike entities from the stars who are not actively malevolent towards humanity, but are so vast, so alien and so powerful, that we are utterly beneath their notice. We are ants on a sidewalk, and they are the indifferent walker, who might crush us without ever knowing we were there. The horror in Lovecraft's tales comes from the dawning realization of this cosmic irrelevance. His protagonists are often scholars or antiquarians who stumble upon a forbidden text or a hidden ruin that peels back the comforting illusions of human importance, revealing the terrifying indifferent truth of the universe. This discovery often leads not to a heroic battle but to madness. The fear engine in Lovecraft's hands was no longer creating stories about defeating monsters to restore order. It was creating narratives about the impossibility of understanding, let alone defeating, the true forces of the universe. The story of cosmic horror is the story of humanity's demotion, from the center of creation to a forgotten, insignificant footnote. It is a narrative born from the anxieties of an age that saw individual lives extinguished by the millions for reasons that seemed increasingly opaque and absurd. This sense of dehumanization and anxiety was amplified by the rapid urbanization of the 20th century. As people flocked to cities, the old rural communities and their folklore began to fade, but fear did not. It simply found a new habitat. The sprawling, anonymous metropolis became the setting for a new kind of storytelling, the urban legend. Urban legends are the folklore of the modern age, passed not around a campfire, but through schoolyards, office break rooms, and eventually the internet. They are perfectly adapted to our contemporary fears. The classic tale of the hookman, about an escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand, who terrorizes teenagers in a parked car, is a direct evolution of the old monster in the woods narrative, updated for a car culture. It speaks to anxieties about nascent sexuality, privacy, and the random violence of the modern world. The story of the vanishing hitchhiker, a ghostly figure picked up on a lonely road, who disappears from the car, leaving behind an item that traces back to their own grave, reflects a fear of the lingering, unresolved past, and the strangers we encounter in our transient society. The urban legend of alligators in the sewers speaks to a fear of the wild, untamable nature lurking just beneath the pristine surfaces of our engineered cities. It suggests that our control over our environment is an illusion. Unlike ancient myths, urban legends are rarely about heroes or grand moral lessons. They are stripped down, efficient, fear delivery systems. They almost always happen to a friend of a friend, giving them a veneer of plausibility that bypasses our rational defenses. The fear engine, in creating urban legends, is processing our anxieties about modernity itself, the anonymity of city life, the potential dangers of new technologies, and the sense that despite our skyscrapers and streetlights, we are just as vulnerable as our ancestors were in the dark woods. These stories are the cautionary tales for the concrete jungle. Then came the Cold War, and with it, a fear more absolute and encompassing than any that had come before, the fear of total nuclear annihilation. For the first time in history, humanity possessed the technology to cause its own extinction in a matter of minutes. This existential dread, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety that permeated daily life for decades, fueled an explosion of science fiction narratives. The fear of nuclear holocaust, manifested in countless stories of post-apocalyptic survival, were the remnants of humanity's struggle in a desolate, irradiated wasteland. But the fear also took on more metaphorical forms. The monster movies of the 1950s, especially in Japan, are a direct cultural processing of nuclear trauma. Godzilla 1954 is the ultimate nuclear monster, awakened and empowered by atomic bomb testing. He rises from the depths of the ocean to unleash a destructive force akin to a nuclear blast upon the city of Tokyo. He is nature's horrifying, tragic revenge for humanity's scientific hubris. Godzilla is not merely a giant lizard. He is a walking nuclear bomb, a physical embodiment of a nation's profound trauma and fear. In America, the fear of the other during the Cold War, the communist infiltrator, was channeled into narratives like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The film's pod people are terrifying not because they are violent, but because they are insidious. They look exactly like your friends, your family, your neighbors, but on the inside they are emotionless, conformist duplicates, part of a collective bent on silent takeover. The story is a perfect allegory for the McCarthy-era fear of communism, the terror that the enemy was not an external army, but a hidden ideology that could secretly corrupt society from within, turning individualistic Americans into soulless drones. The fear engine was now fully politicized, crafting narratives that reinforced national identity and justified political paranoia. As we move into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the fear engine has continued to adapt, processing new anxieties with startling efficiency. The rise of the serial killer in the public consciousness during the 1970s and 80s shifted the monster narrative once more. The monster was no longer a ghost, a vampire, or an alien. It was a human being, often seemingly normal, who committed unspeakable acts for incomprehensible reasons. The slasher film genre, with figures like Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger, brought the monster into the suburbs, into our very homes. This reflected a growing fear that the social contract was breaking down, that the safety of our communities was an illusion. Today, in the digital age, our fears have become even more complex. We fear the loss of privacy, the spread of misinformation, and the curated, artificial nature of online identity. These anxieties are giving rise to new narratives of technological horror, stories about haunted video games, malevolent AIs, and the dark web. The story of Slender Man, a creature born entirely on an internet forum that inspired real-world violence, is a terrifying example of how quickly a digital narrative can bleed into reality. It demonstrates that the fear engine is now operating at the speed of light, capable of crafting and disseminating a new monster to a global audience in a matter of hours.